You've probably seen the pictures, these massive, glowing, futuristic towers that promise to sustainably feed our cities. It looks like something straight out of science fiction. But is this the future of food? Or is it all just hype? That's what we're diving into today, the wild world of vertical farming.
So, I want you to imagine something. What if our farms weren't these sprawling green fields, but were actually towering indoor factories, churning out fresh greens all year long? And look, this isn't some far-off dream. It's already happening. In Newark, New Jersey, a company called Aero Farms is doing just that, growing thousands of pounds of produce inside a warehouse.
So how in the world do you run a farm without fields, without sunlight, and get this, even without soil? It sounds impossible, right? Well, let's pull back the curtain and take a look under the hood of these incredible food factories. Okay, so the basic idea is actually pretty simple. Vertical farming is, well, exactly what it sounds like. Instead of spreading crops out horizontally across huge plots of land, you stack them up, one on top of the other, to maximize every single square foot of space inside a totally controlled building. Now, it turns out there are a couple of main ways they do this. That company we mentioned, Aero Farms, they're kind of an outlier. They use a method called aeroponics, where the plant roots literally just hang in the air and get sprayed with this nutrient-rich mist. But the much more common method, used by companies like Bowery, is hydroponics, where the plants grow directly in trays of recycled, nutrient-filled water. At the end of the day, this whole thing is a marvel of technology. You've got the vertical stacks, obviously, but since there's no sun, you have these super specialized LED lights acting as artificial sunlight. Some of these systems are so advanced, they can shine the exact color spectrum a plant needs to grow best. Throw in some AI and robots to monitor everything, and a perfectly controlled climate, and what you have is a farm that runs like a high-tech factory. And all this tech, man, has it generated a ton of excitement and a ton of investment. The people who believe in this say it's the answer to feeding a growing planet while fighting climate change. So let's take a look at the utopian promise they're selling. All right, get ready for some absolutely wild numbers. First up, yield. A San Francisco company called Plenty claims they can produce a staggering 400 times the amount of food as a regular farm on the same amount of land. Yeah, you heard that right. 400 times. And it's not just about yield. Next up, water. Because those hydroponic systems are what's called closed loop, they just keep recycling their water over and over. This means they can use up to 95% less water than traditional farming. In places where water is scarce, that's an absolute game changer. And get this, because the whole operation is sealed off from the outside world, you don't really get pests or diseases. And what does that mean? It means they can grow all this produce with basically zero pesticides or herbicides. I mean, the list of promises just keeps going. You get fresh produce year-round, no matter the season. You can build these farms anywhere, in a desert, in the Arctic, or even right next to the supermarket. And of course, no soil means no soil depletion. It all sounds pretty perfect, right? Well, this is where we need to pump the brakes a little bit. That utopian vision, the one with the robots and the glowing lights, it comes with some very serious and very hidden costs. So, let's get into the reality check. The dream of a perfectly sustainable, high-tech food system is, well, it's a powerful one. But when you actually start to look at the numbers, that dream starts to get very, very expensive. And I mean very expensive. Just look at this. Starting a large conventional farm is already a huge investment, right? We're talking around $5 million. But to get a high-tech vertical farm off the ground, the startup costs can be as high as $39 million. That is just a massive barrier to entry for almost everyone. And the costs don't stop once it's built. The day-to-day operations are incredibly expensive, mainly because of one thing: energy. One study looked at a vertical farm in New York City and estimated it would pay over $200,000 a year just for the lights and another $120,000 for the air conditioning. That's over $350,000 a year just to keep the lights and the AC on. So where do all those massive costs go? Well, inevitably, they get passed right on to you, the consumer. One agricultural consultant estimates that a pound of lettuce from a vertical farm costs roughly 5 times more than the same lettuce grown in a field. But the crazy high price tag isn't the only reality check here. There's another cost, one that's maybe even more surprising: the environmental one. For a technology that's sold as a climate solution, the carbon footprint can be pretty shocking.
Yeah, this one is a tough pill to swallow. All that electricity for the LEDs and the climate control has a huge impact. One reporter found that if you build one of these farms in a place that gets its energy from fossil fuels, it could generate up to 20 times more greenhouse gases than an outdoor farm growing the exact same crop.
Okay, but wait a minute. I hear you saying, what about all the emissions you're saving by not trucking lettuce across the country? That's the whole point, right? To grow local? It's a fair question, but it turns out those food miles are a much smaller part of the carbon puzzle than we've been led to believe. Take a look at this breakdown from Paul West over at the University of Minnesota. He found that a full 80% of a farm's carbon emissions happen on the farm itself, from things like fertilizer and machinery. Transportation only accounts for a fraction of the total. So yeah, cutting food miles helps, but it's a drop in the bucket compared to a massive spike in energy use at the farm itself. So, where does all of this leave us? On the one hand, you've got this incredible technology with a ton of potential. But on the other, you have staggering costs and a surprisingly large carbon footprint. It seems like the verdict is that this is a really interesting niche solution, but it is not the silver bullet many hoped it would be. And here's why it's a niche solution. Vertical farms are really only good at efficiently growing things like lettuce and leafy greens. But those crops already have a tiny carbon footprint when they're grown outside. So, in a way, vertical farming is just tinkering at the edges of the problem, while the single biggest emitter in all of agriculture, the meat industry, is completely unaddressed. Maybe we're even focusing on the wrong problem altogether. The global food crisis isn't really about a lack of production. We actually grow more than enough food to feed everyone on the planet. The real problem is infrastructure and distribution. Globally, we waste a full 1/3 of all the food we produce. A quote from one of the sources for this explainer really just hits the nail on the head. It says that investing all this money into vertical farms feels a lot like trying to colonize Mars to escape climate change. An incredibly expensive techno fix for a problem that has much cheaper, more just answers right here on Earth. It really leaves us with one big question to chew on. In our rush to solve huge problems like food security and climate change, are we getting so mesmerized by the flashiest, most high-tech solutions that we're overlooking the simpler, more effective answers that are already right in front of us? Something to think about.